Why did God let an entire generation die just 11 days away from their promised land? What made the ground literally open its mouth and swallow people whole? How does a talking donkey change the fate of a nation? And why is the fourth book of the Bible called Numbers when it contains some of the most supernatural events in Scripture? These aren't just ancient mysteries. They're keys to understanding how God operates in our world today. Numbers holds secrets that most Christians never discover, buried beneath genealogies and census lists that seem boring on the surface. But what if I told you that every rebellion recorded here mirrors struggles you face right now? What if the wilderness wandering isn't just history, but a mirror reflecting your own spiritual journey? Get ready to uncover why Numbers isn't just another Bible book. It's the handbook for surviving your own wilderness seasons. The desert air was thick with anticipation as God spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai. It had been exactly 1 year since they escaped Egypt, and now the Lord had a special task. As recorded in chapter 1, verse 2, God commanded, "Take a census of all the congregation of the children of Israel, by their families, by their fathers' houses, according to the number of names, every male individually, from 20 years old and above, all who are able to go to war in Israel." Moses and Aaron didn't waste time. They called together the heads of each tribe, men whose names meant something to their people. These weren't random choices. God had specifically chosen leaders like Eliezer from Reuben, Shelumiel from Simeon, and Nahshon from Judah. Each man would count his own tribe's fighting men. The counting began tribe by tribe. Reuben's descendants produced 46,500 warriors. Simeon brought 59,300 men ready for battle. Gad contributed 45,650 fighters. As the numbers rolled in, something amazing became clear. Israel wasn't just a group of escaped slaves anymore. They were becoming an army. When all the counting finished, the total was staggering. Chapter 1, verse 46, records the final number. All who were numbered were 603,550, over 600,000 fighting men, each between 20 and 60 years old. If you added women, children, and older men, Israel had become a nation of nearly 2 million people. But there was one tribe missing from this military count. The Levites weren't numbered with the others. As God explained in verses 49 to 50, "Only the tribe of Levi you shall not number, nor take a census of them among the children of Israel. But you shall appoint the Levites over the tabernacle of the testimony, over all its furnishings, and over all things that belong to it." The Levites had a different job. They would be God's special servants. God wasn't finished organizing his people. Having an army was one thing, but where would 2 million people live in the desert? The answer came in chapter 2 with the most detailed camping instructions ever given. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron with precise directions. "Every one of the children of Israel shall camp by his own standard, beside the emblems of his father's house. They shall camp some distance from the tabernacle of meeting." Picture this massive camp from above. Right in the center sat the tabernacle, God's house on earth. This wasn't just any tent, but the place where the Creator of the universe chose to live among his people. Around this holy center, the 12 tribes would arrange themselves in perfect order. On the east side, 3 tribes would camp together. Judah would lead with 74,600 men, followed by Issachar with 54,400, and Zebulun with 57,400. Their total eastern force, 186,400 warriors, all under Judah's leadership. These would be the first to march when the camp moved. The south side belonged to Reuben's division. Reuben brought 46,500 men, Simeon added 59,300, and Gad contributed 45,650. Together, they formed an army of 151,450 fighters. When it was time to move, Reuben's group would follow second. On the west, Ephraim commanded 40,500 warriors, Manasseh had 32,200, and Benjamin brought 35,400. Their combined force of 108,100 would march third in the great procession. Finally, Dan's division held the north with the largest group. Dan himself led 62,700 men, Asher added 41,500, and Naphtali contributed 53,400. This northern army of 157 to 600 would bring up the rear, protecting everyone from attacks behind. But the real beauty wasn't in the numbers, it was in the design. As chapter 2, verse 17 explains, "And the tabernacle of meeting shall move out with the camp of the Levites in the middle of the camps. As they camp, so they shall move out, everyone in his place, by their standards." While the other tribes prepared for war, the Levites received a completely different mission. God had chosen them for something far more dangerous than fighting human enemies. They would serve in his presence. Chapter 3 opens with a shocking declaration from the Lord in verse 12. "Now behold, I myself have taken the Levites from among the children of Israel, instead of all the firstborn who open the womb among the children of Israel. Therefore the Levites shall be mine." This wasn't random selection. God was making a trade. Remember when he killed every firstborn in Egypt but spared Israel's firstborn sons? Those boys belonged to him now. But instead of claiming them all, God chose the entire tribe of Levi as his payment. Moses counted the Levites separately, and the numbers were interesting. From 1 month old and up, there were 22,000 Levite males. God then commanded Moses to count all the firstborn males in the rest of Israel. That number came to 22,273. The math was almost perfect, but 273 firstborn boys remained unclaimed. These families had to pay a redemption price of 5 shekels each to buy back their sons. The Levites weren't just thrown together randomly. God organized them into 3 distinct groups, each with specific duties. The descendants of Gershon would camp on the west side of the tabernacle. Their job involved the coverings, curtains, and screens, basically all the fabric parts of God's house. Kohath's family received the most sacred assignment. They would camp on the south side and handle the holy furniture inside the tabernacle. But there was a catch. They could only touch these items after the priests properly covered them. One glimpse of the ark or altar without proper covering meant instant death. The Merarites got the heavy lifting. Camping on the north side, they were responsible for the frames, bars, pillars, and sockets, all the structural elements that held God's house together. When it was time to move, they would disassemble and reassemble the entire framework. Aaron and his sons, the priests, held the most dangerous position of all. They camped directly east of the tabernacle entrance. As verse 38 warns, "And whoever comes near shall be put to death." Their job was to protect the holiness of God's dwelling place, even if it cost them their lives. Of all the Levites, the Kohathites had the most terrifying job. Chapter 4 describes their duties with deadly precision. These weren't casual instructions. One mistake could kill not just the guilty party, but potentially bring God's judgment on the entire nation. When the camp prepared to move, Aaron and his sons had to work fast. They would enter the most holy place and carefully take down the veil that separated God's presence from the people. This veil would become the covering for the Ark of the Covenant. Then, as verse 6 describes, "Then they shall put on it a covering of badger skins, and spread over that a cloth entirely of blue, and they shall insert its poles." Every sacred object required its own specific wrapping. The table of showbread got covered with blue cloth, then the dishes, spoons, bowls, and pitchers for pouring were placed on top. A scarlet cloth went over everything, followed by badger skins, and finally the carrying poles were inserted. The golden lampstand received similar treatment: blue cloth, badger skins, then placed on a carrying frame. The golden altar got wrapped in blue cloth and badger skins with its poles. All the service utensils were bundled in blue cloth, covered with badger skins, and placed on carrying frames. But the bronze altar presented the biggest challenge. The priests had to remove the ashes and spread a purple cloth over it. Then all the altar's tools, the pans, forks, shovels, and basins, were placed on top, covered with badger skins and fitted with carrying poles. Only after this careful preparation could the Kohathites approach. Chapter 4, verse 15 makes their situation crystal clear. And when Aaron and his sons have finished covering the sanctuary and all the furnishings of the sanctuary, when the camp is set to go, then the sons of Kohath shall come to carry them, but they shall not touch any holy thing, lest they die. The Kohathites numbered 2,750 men between ages 30 and 50, all in their prime. But their strength meant nothing if they made one wrong move. Eleazar, Aaron's son, supervised them personally, carrying the oil for the lampstand, the sweet incense, the daily grain offering, and the anointing oil. He couldn't delegate this responsibility to anyone else. Living in God's presence required more than just organization. It demanded purity. Chapter 5 reveals how seriously God took cleanliness among his people. The Lord spoke to Moses with clear instructions in verse 2. Command the children of Israel that they put out of the camp every leper, everyone who has a discharge, and whoever becomes defiled by a corpse. This wasn't cruelty, it was protection. God's presence in the camp made it different from any other place on earth. As verse 3 explains, you shall put out both male and female. You shall put them outside the camp, that they may not defile their camps in the midst of which I dwell. But purity wasn't just about physical cleanliness. It extended to relationships and trust between people. If someone stole or cheated their neighbor, they couldn't just say sorry and move on. Verses 6 to 7 required full restoration. When a man or woman commits any sin that men commit in unfaithfulness toward the Lord, and that person is guilty, then he shall confess the sin which he has committed. He shall make restitution for his guilt in full, plus 1/5 of it, and give it to the one he has wronged. The most difficult situation involves suspected adultery. When a husband suspected his wife but had no proof, God provided a mysterious test. The woman would be brought to the priest with an offering of barley flour, no oil or incense, because this was an offering of jealousy, bringing sin to memory. The priest would prepare special water in an earthen vessel, mixing it with dust from the tabernacle floor. Then he would write the curses on a scroll and wash the ink into the bitter water. The woman had to drink this mixture while holding the grain offering. As described in verses 27-28, when he has made her drink the water, then it shall be, if she has defiled herself and behaved unfaithfully toward her husband, that the water that brings a curse will enter her and become bitter, and her belly will swell, her thigh will rot, and the woman will become a curse among her people. But if the woman has not defiled herself and is clean, then she will be free and may conceive children. This wasn't superstition. It was God's own judgment system, protecting both innocent wives from false accusations and guilty ones from hiding their sin. Sometimes people wanted to give God more than just regular obedience. Chapter 6 describes a special vow called the Nazirite commitment, a way for ordinary Israelites to dedicate themselves completely to the Lord. As verses 2-3 explain, when either a man or woman consecrates an offering to take the vow of a Nazirite, to separate himself to the Lord, he shall separate himself from wine and similar drink. He shall drink neither vinegar made from wine nor vinegar made from similar drink, neither shall he drink any grape juice, nor eat fresh grapes or raisins. The Nazirite made 3 specific promises. First, no alcohol or grape products would pass their lips. This wasn't about alcohol being evil. It was about total self-control and dependence on God alone for joy and strength. Second, no razor would touch their head. Verse 5 states, all the days of the vow of his separation, no razor shall come upon his head, until the days are fulfilled for which he separated himself to the Lord. He shall be holy. Then he shall let the locks of the hair of his head grow. Long hair became a visible sign of their dedication. Third, they couldn't go near dead bodies, not even their own family members. Verses 6-7 make this clear. All the days that he separates himself to the Lord, he shall not go near a dead body. He shall not make himself unclean even for his father or his mother, for his brother or his sister, when they die, because his consecration to God is on his head. If a Nazirite accidentally touched a corpse, they had to start over completely. They would shave their head, bring specific offerings, and begin their vow period again from day one. When the vow period ended, the ceremony was elaborate. The Nazirite would bring a male lamb for a burnt offering, a female lamb for a sin offering, and a ram for a peace offering, along with various grain and drink offerings. Then, as verse 18 describes, then the Nazirite shall shave his consecrated head at the door of the tabernacle of meeting, and shall take the hair from his consecrated head and put it on the fire which is under the sacrifice of the peace offering. But chapter 6 doesn't end with vows. It concludes with the most beautiful blessing in the Bible. God gave Aaron and his sons special words to speak over Israel, recorded in verses 24-26. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. When the tabernacle was finally complete and anointed, something wonderful happened. The tribal leaders decided to bring gifts for its dedication. Chapter 7 records what became a 12-day celebration of generosity and worship. The leaders came together with an amazing gift described in verses 3. And they brought their offering before the Lord, 6 covered carts and 12 oxen, a cart for every 2 of the leaders, and for each one an ox. And they presented them before the tabernacle. God told Moses to accept these gifts and distribute them to the Levites for their service. The Gershonites received 2 carts and 4 oxen for transporting the tabernacle's coverings. The Merarites got 4 carts and 8 oxen for the heavy structural pieces. But the Kohathites received nothing. They had to carry the holy furniture on their shoulders. Then began the individual offerings. Each tribal leader brought identical gifts, but God recorded every single day separately. Nashon of Judah went first on day 1, with his offering detailed in verses 13-17. His offering was 1 silver platter, the weight of which was 130 shekels, and 1 silver bowl of 70 shekels, according to the shekel of the sanctuary, both of them full of fine flour mixed with oil as a grain offering, 1 gold pan of 10 shekels, full of incense, 1 young bull, 1 ram, and 1 male lamb in its first year as a burnt offering, 1 kid of the goats as a sin offering, and as the sacrifice of peace offerings, 2 oxen, 5 rams, 5 male goats, and 5 male lambs in their first year. Day after day, each leader brought the exact same gifts. Nethanel of Issachar on day 2, Eliab of Zebulun on day 3, Elizur of Reuben on day 4. The pattern continued for all 12 tribes, with God carefully recording each leader's name and offering. Some might ask why God bothered writing down the same list 12 times. The answer reveals something beautiful about his character. Each tribe's worship mattered individually to him. He didn't see a mass offering. He saw Shelumiel's heart, Eliasaf's devotion, Elishama's worship. The final totals were impressive. 12 silver platters, 12 silver bowls, 12 gold pans, 24 bulls, 60 rams, 60 male goats, and 60 male lambs for burnt offerings. 12 kids of goats for sin offerings, and for peace offerings, 24 oxen, 60 rams, 60 male goats, and 60 male lambs. Chapter 7 ends with a stunning verse, 89. Now when Moses went into the tabernacle of meeting to speak with him, he heard the voice of one speaking to him from above the mercy seat that was on the ark of the testimony, from between the 2 cherubim. Thus he spoke to him. All this worship and generosity had accomplished something amazing. It opened communication between heaven and earth. As the great journey approached, God gave final instructions for his traveling sanctuary. Chapter 8 begins with directions for Aaron about the lampstand. When you arrange the lamps, the 7 lamps shall give light in front of the lampstand. This wasn't just about providing light, it was about maintaining God's presence among his people. The Levites still needed one more ceremony before they could serve. God commanded a special purification ritual described in verses 6 to 7. Take the Levites from among the children of Israel and cleanse them ceremonially. Thus you shall do to them to cleanse them. Sprinkle water of purification on them, and let them shave all their body, and let them wash their clothes, and so make themselves clean. The ceremony was public and dramatic. All Israel gathered as the Levites were presented before the tabernacle. The people laid hands on the Levites, symbolically giving them to God. Then Aaron offered the Levites as a wave offering, lifting them up before the Lord. This wasn't just ritual, it was a complete transfer of ownership. God explained his reasoning in verses 16 to 18. For they are wholly given to me from among the children of Israel. I have taken them for myself instead of all who open the womb, the firstborn of all the children of Israel. For all the firstborn among the children of Israel are mine, both man and beast. On the day that I struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, I sanctified them to myself. I have taken the Levites instead of all the firstborn of the children of Israel. The Levites would serve from age 25 to 50. After 50, they could assist their brothers, but couldn't do the heavy work anymore. This showed God's concern for both his service and his servants' well-being. Chapter 9 brings us to their first Passover in the wilderness. It was the 14th day of the first month, exactly 1 year after their escape from Egypt, as verse 5 records. And they kept the Passover on the 14th day of the first month, at twilight, in the wilderness of Sinai, according to all that the Lord commanded Moses, so the children of Israel did. But some men had a problem. They were ceremonially unclean because they had touched dead bodies, so they couldn't participate in Passover. They came to Moses asking what to do. Moses took their question directly to God, who gave a wonderful answer in verses 10 to 11. If any one of you or your posterity is unclean because of a corpse or is far away on a journey, he may still keep the Lord's Passover. On the 14th day of the second month at twilight they may keep it. This revealed God's heart. He wanted everyone to remember their deliverance, even those who faced unavoidable obstacles. Finally, God provided the ultimate guidance system. The cloud that had covered the tabernacle during its construction now became their traveling companion. Verses 21-22 describe how it worked. So it was, when the cloud remained only from evening until morning. When the cloud was taken up in the morning, then they would journey, whether by day or by night. Whenever the cloud was taken up, they would journey, whether it was 2 days, a month, or a year that the cloud remained above the tabernacle. The children of Israel would remain encamped and not journey. But when it was taken up, they would journey. 2 million people would move when God moved and stop when God stopped. Their schedule belonged entirely to him. The moment had finally arrived. After a full year at Mount Sinai, God was ready to move his people toward the promised land. But first, he gave Moses one more set of instructions. Chapter 10 opens with the Lord commanding, "Make 2 silver trumpets for yourself. You shall make them of hammered work. You shall use them for calling the congregation and for directing the movement of the camps." These weren't ordinary horns. The silver trumpets would become the communication system for 2 million people. 1 long blast meant gather for assembly. 2 long blasts meant everyone should pack up and get ready to march. Different trumpet sounds would signal which tribes should move first, second, third, and fourth. Aaron's sons, the priests, would be the only ones allowed to blow these sacred trumpets. As verse 8 explains, "The sons of Aaron, the priests, shall blow the trumpets, and these shall be to you as an ordinance forever throughout your generations." On the 20th day of the second month of the second year, something incredible happened. The cloud that had rested over the tabernacle for so long finally lifted. Verse 11 records this historic moment. Now it came to pass on the 20th day of the second month, in the second year, that the cloud was taken up from above the tabernacle of the testimony. The massive migration began exactly as planned. Judah's standard moved out first, leading the eastern division. Behind them came the Gershonites and Merarites, carrying the tabernacle framework. Then Reuben's standard advanced with the southern division. Next came the most sacred part. The Kohathites marched, carrying the holy furniture on their shoulders. The ark, the altar, the lampstand, all carefully wrapped. Ephraim's standard followed with the western division. Finally, Dan's division brought up the rear, serving as the rear guard for the entire congregation. As the ark moved forward, Moses would cry out the words recorded in verse 35. "Rise up, O Lord, let your enemies be scattered, and let those who hate you flee before you." And when the ark rested, he would say, "Return, O Lord, to the many thousands of Israel." The honeymoon didn't last long. After just 3 days of traveling, the people started complaining. Chapter 11, verse 1 tells us what happened. Now, when the people complained, it displeased the Lord, for the Lord heard it, and his anger was aroused. So the fire of the Lord burned among them, and consumed some in the outskirts of the camp. This wasn't just grumbling. It was the beginning of a pattern that would define Israel's wilderness experience. The people had God's presence in the cloud, his provision of manna every morning, his protection from enemies, and his clear guidance. But instead of gratitude, they chose complaint. The fire stopped only when the people cried out to Moses, and Moses prayed to the Lord. They named that place Taberah, which means burning. But the complaining wasn't over. Soon a group of people started craving meat. Verse 4 describes how it spread. Now the mixed multitude who were among them yielded to intense craving. So the children of Israel also wept again and said, "Who will give us meat to eat?" They remembered the food they had in Egypt, the fish, cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. They conveniently forgot about the slavery, the beatings, and the murder of their children. All they could think about was the taste of meat. Moses heard the people weeping throughout their families, every man at his tent door, the sound of all. That crying and complaining overwhelmed him. In verses 11-12, Moses poured out his heart to God. "Why have you afflicted your servant? And why have I not found favor in your sight, that you have laid the burden of all these people on me?" God's answer was gracious. He told Moses to gather 70 elders, and he would take some of the spirit that was on Moses and put it on them to help carry the burden of leadership. But for the meat problem, God had a different solution. In verse 18, he told Moses to tell the people, "Tomorrow you shall eat meat, for you have wept in the hearing of the Lord, saying, 'Who will give us meat to eat?' Therefore the Lord will give you meat, and you shall eat." God promised they would eat meat for a whole month, until it became loathsome to them. The next day, a wind from the Lord brought quail from the sea. The birds were piled up 3 feet deep all around the camp for a day's journey in every direction. People spent all day, all night, and all the next day gathering quail. Even the person who gathered the least collected 10 homers, about 60 bushels. But while the meat was still between their teeth, the wrath of the Lord struck the people with a very great plague. They buried the people who had craved meat at a place they called Kibroth Hatava, which means graves of craving. Just when Moses thought things couldn't get more difficult, he faced his most personal attack yet. His own brother and sister turned against him. Chapter 12, verse 1, reveals the shocking beginning. Then Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. The complaint about Moses' wife seemed to be just an excuse. The real issue came out in verse 2. So they said, "Has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also?" and the Lord heard it. This wasn't just sibling rivalry. Miriam and Aaron were challenging Moses' unique relationship with God. They were essentially saying, "We're prophets too. Why should Moses be the only one who gets to speak for God?" But they had picked the wrong target. Verse 3 gives us a crucial detail about Moses' character. Now the man Moses was very humble, more than all men who were on the face of the earth. Moses wasn't defending himself or fighting back. He just quietly endured their attacks. God, however, would not let this challenge go unanswered. Suddenly, the Lord spoke to all three of them. "Come out, you three, to the tabernacle of meeting." When they came out, the Lord came down in the pillar of cloud and stood in the door of the tabernacle. God called Aaron and Miriam forward and spoke words that would settle the matter forever. In verses 6 to 8, the Lord explained, "Hear now my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak to him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. I speak with him face to face, even plainly, and not in dark sayings. And he sees the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses?" The anger of the Lord was aroused against them, and when the cloud departed from above the tabernacle, something terrible had happened. Miriam had become leprous, as white as snow. Aaron looked at her and immediately understood the severity of their sin. Aaron turned to Moses and begged, "Oh, my Lord, please do not lay this sin on us, in which we have done foolishly and in which we have sinned." Moses immediately cried out to the Lord, "Please heal her, O God, I pray." His response showed no bitterness or revenge, just love for his sister, but God's justice required consequence. The Lord told Moses in verse 14, "If her father had but spit in her face, would she not be shamed 7 days? Let her be shut out of the camp 7 days, and afterward she may be received again." So Miriam was confined outside the camp for 7 days. The entire nation waited for her. They didn't move until she was brought back in. When the camp finally reached Kadesh Barnea, they were at the southern border of the Promised Land. The time had come to enter and possess what God had given them. But first, God allowed Moses to send scouts to explore the land. Chapter 13, verse 2 records the Lord's permission. "Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, everyone a leader among them." Moses carefully chose 12 men, one from each tribe. These weren't random soldiers, but tribal leaders. From Judah came Caleb. From Ephraim came Joshua, whom Moses had renamed from Hosea, meaning salvation, to Joshua, meaning the Lord saves. Moses gave them specific instructions in verses 17 to 20. "Go up this way into the south, and go up to the mountains, and see what the land is like, whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, few or many, whether the land they dwell in is good or bad, whether the cities they inhabit are like camps or strongholds, whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are forests there or not. Be of good courage, and bring some of the fruit of the land." It was the season of the first ripe grapes, perfect timing for gathering evidence of the land's richness. The 12 spies spent 40 days exploring from the wilderness of Zin in the south all the way to Rehob, near Hamath in the north. In the valley of Eshcol, they found grapes so large that it took 2 men to carry one cluster on a pole between them. They also gathered pomegranates and figs as proof of the land's abundance. After 40 days, they returned to Kadesh Barnea, where all Israel waited for their report. Verse 27 records their unanimous agreement about one thing. "We went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit." The fruit spoke for itself. Massive grapes, perfect pomegranates, delicious figs. God had told the truth about giving them a good land, but then came the word that changed everything. Nevertheless, 10 of the spies continued in verse 28. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong, the cities are fortified, and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there, but Caleb had heard enough. Verse 30 shows his bold response. Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it." The 10 spies immediately contradicted him. "We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we." Then they brought an evil report, saying in verse 33, "There we saw the giants. The descendants of Anak came from the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight." 2 reports, same land, same evidence, but completely different conclusions. That night, the camp erupted in panic. Chapter 14, verse 1 describes the scene. "So all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night." This wasn't quiet disappointment, this was mass hysteria. By morning, the people had made their decision. Verse 2 records their shocking words, "And all the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron. And the whole congregation said to them, 'If only we had died in the land of Egypt, or if only we had died in this wilderness.'" But they weren't finished. Verse 3 reveals how completely they had rejected God's promise. "Why has the Lord brought us to this land, to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt?" Then came the ultimate act of rebellion. Verse 4, "So they said to one another, 'Let us select a leader and return to Egypt.'" They were ready to abandon Moses, abandon God's promise, and march back into slavery. Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly. Joshua and Caleb tore their clothes and spoke desperately to the people in verses 7 to 9. "The land we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them." But the congregation was beyond reason. They picked up stones to throw at Joshua and Caleb. At that moment, the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle before all Israel. God spoke to Moses with words that shook the foundation of everything. "How long will these people reject me? And how long will they not believe me, with all the signs which I have performed among them? I will strike them with the pestilence and disinherit them, and I will make of you a nation greater and mightier than they." Moses interceded for the people, reminding God of his reputation among the nations. In verse 19, Moses pleaded, "Pardon the iniquity of this people, I pray, according to the greatness of your mercy, just as you have forgiven this people from Egypt even until now." God answered, "I have pardoned according to your word." But his mercy came with devastating justice. In verses 22-23, the Lord declared, "Because all these men who have seen my glory and the signs which I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and have put me to the test now these 10 times, and have not heeded my voice, they certainly shall not see the land of which I swore to their fathers, nor shall any of those who rejected me see it." Every person 20 years old and above who had participated in the rebellion would die in the wilderness. They would wander for 40 years, 1 year for each day the spies had explored the land, until their bodies fell in the desert. Only Caleb and Joshua would enter the promised land. The 10 spies who brought the evil report died immediately by plague before the Lord. Even as God pronounced judgment on the rebellious generation, he did something remarkable. Chapter 15 begins with these hopeful words, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, 'Speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, when you have come into the land you are to inhabit, which I am giving to you.'" Notice that God didn't say, "If you enter the land," but "when you enter the land." Despite their rebellion, despite the 40-year delay, God's promises remained unchanged. He would still give them the land, just not to this generation. God gave detailed instructions for offerings they would make once they settled in the Promised Land. These laws covered grain offerings, drink offerings, and sacrifices for various occasions. Each instruction was a reminder that God's plan would continue even though the current generation had disqualified themselves. The chapter also addresses unintentional sins and provides ways for the community to make things right with God. But it also deals harshly with deliberate rebellion. Verses 30-31 make this clear. But the person who does anything presumptuously, whether he is native-born or a stranger, that one brings reproach on the Lord, and he shall be cut off from among his people. Because he has despised the word of the Lord and has broken his commandment, that person shall be completely cut off. His guilt shall be upon him. To illustrate this principle, the chapter records an incident where a man was found gathering sticks on the Sabbath. The people brought him to Moses and Aaron, uncertain what to do. God's answer was swift. The man was to be stoned to death. This wasn't cruelty. It was a demonstration that some sins have permanent consequences. Finally, God commanded the people to make tassels on the corners of their garments with blue threads. Verse 39 explains the purpose. And you shall have the tassel, that you may look upon it, and remember all the commandments of the Lord and do them, and that you may not follow the harlotry to which your own heart and your own eyes are inclined. If Israel thought their troubles were over, they were wrong. Chapter 16 introduces us to Korah, a Levite who had grown tired of his assigned role. Along with Dathan, Abiram, and On from the tribe of Reuben, Korah gathered 250 well-known leaders of the congregation for a direct challenge to Moses and Aaron. Verse 3 records their accusation. They gathered together against Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You take too much upon yourselves, for all the congregation is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord?" This wasn't just about leadership roles, it was about the very nature of holiness and authority. Korah was essentially arguing that everyone was equally holy, so why should Moses and Aaron have special positions? When Moses heard this, he fell on his face. Then he spoke to Korah and his followers. "Tomorrow morning the Lord will show who is his and who is holy, and will cause him to come near to him. That one whom he chooses, he will cause to come near to him." Moses proposed a test. Korah and his 250 followers should take censers, put fire and incense in them, and present themselves before the Lord. God would make it clear who he had chosen for the priesthood. Moses then confronted Korah directly in verses 9 to 10. "Is it a small thing to you that the God of Israel has separated you from the congregation of Israel to bring you near to himself, to do the work of the tabernacle of the Lord, and to stand before the congregation to serve them? And he has brought you near to himself, you and all your brethren, the sons of Levi, with you, and are you seeking the priesthood also?" As for Dathan and Abiram, they refused to even come when Moses called them. They sent back a sarcastic message. In verse 14, "Moreover, you have not brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey, nor given us inheritance of fields and vineyards. Will you put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up." This made Moses very angry. He told the Lord, "Do not respect their offering. I have not taken one donkey from them, nor have I hurt one of them." The next morning, Korah gathered all the congregation against Moses and Aaron at the door of the tabernacle. Suddenly, the glory of the Lord appeared to all the congregation. God spoke to Moses and Aaron, "Separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment." But Moses and Aaron fell on their faces and cried out, "O God, the God of the spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin, and you be angry with all the congregation?" God told them to have the people move away from the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Moses then announced the test that would settle everything. In verses 28-30 he declared, "By this you shall know that the Lord has sent me to do all these works, for I have not done them of my own will. If these men die naturally like all men, or if they are visited by the common fate of all men, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord creates a new thing, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that belongs to them, and they go down alive into the pit, then you will understand that these men have rejected the Lord." As soon as Moses finished speaking, something unprecedented happened. Verse 31 records, "Now it came to pass, as he finished speaking all these words, that the ground split apart under them. The earth literally opened its mouth and swallowed Korah, Dathan, Abiram, their families, and all their possessions. They went down alive into the pit, and the earth closed over them. Meanwhile, fire came out from the Lord and consumed the 250 men who were offering incense." Even after such a dramatic display of God's judgment, some people still complained. Chapter 17, verse 6 tells us, "And all the congregation of the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron the next day, saying, 'You have killed the people of the Lord.' They blamed Moses and Aaron for the deaths, as if the two leaders had caused the earth to open. God's anger was kindled again, and he threatened to consume the whole congregation. Moses quickly told Aaron to take a censer with fire from the altar, add incense, and run into the midst of the congregation to make atonement for them. Aaron ran between the dead and the living, and the plague stopped. But not before 14,700 people died, in addition to those who died in Korah's rebellion. To settle the question of priestly authority once and for all, God commanded Moses to collect 12 rods, one from each tribal leader. Aaron's name was written on the rod for the tribe of Levi. All 12 rods were placed in the tabernacle before the testimony. God told Moses in verse 5, "And it shall be that the rod of the man whom I choose will blossom. Thus I will rid myself of the complaints of the children of Israel, which they make against you." The next morning, when Moses went into the tabernacle, something miraculous had happened. Verse 8 describes it. "Now it came to pass on the next day that Moses went into the tabernacle of witness, and behold, the rod of Aaron of the house of Levi had sprouted and put forth buds, had produced blossoms and yielded ripe almonds." Aaron's rod hadn't just budded. It had gone through an entire life cycle overnight. It sprouted, budded, blossomed, and produced ripe almonds, all while the other 11 rods remained unchanged. Moses brought out all the rods to show the people. Each man took his own rod, but God commanded that Aaron's rod be kept before the testimony as a sign against the rebels, to end their complaints against the priesthood. Chapter 18 then establishes the duties and privileges of the priests and Levites. Permanently, Aaron and his sons would bear the iniquity of the sanctuary and the priesthood. The Levites would join them in their duties, but could not come near the articles of the sanctuary or the altar, lest they die. God also established the priests' and Levites' inheritance. They would receive no land in Israel, but instead would be supported by the tithes and offerings of the people. As verse 20 states, "You shall have no inheritance in their land, nor shall you have any portion among them. I am your portion and your inheritance among the children of Israel." Death was everywhere in the wilderness. With 2 million people living together, someone died almost every day. But there was a problem. Anyone who touched a dead body became unclean and couldn't participate in worship or community life. God had a solution, but it was unlike anything else in Scripture. Chapter 19 opens with the Lord speaking to Moses and Aaron. This is the ordinance of the law, which the Lord has commanded, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, that they bring you a red heifer without blemish, in which there is no defect, and on which a yoke has never come. This wasn't just any cow. The heifer had to be completely red, not a single hair of any other color. It had to be perfect, without any physical defects, and it could never have worked, never had a yoke on. Its neck. Finding such an animal was extremely rare. When they found the right heifer, something strange happened. Verse 3 explains, You shall give it to Eleazar the priest, that he may take it outside the camp, and it shall be slaughtered before him. Notice it wasn't Aaron who handled this. It was his son Eleazar. The high priest couldn't be involved, because this ceremony would make him temporarily unclean. Eleazar would take some of the heifer's blood on his finger and sprinkle it 7 times toward the front of the tabernacle. Then the entire heifer would be burned, skin, flesh, blood, and waste everything together. While it burned, the priest would throw cedar wood, hyssop, and scarlet wool into the fire. The priest who burned the heifer became unclean until evening. The man who gathered the ashes became unclean until evening. Even the man who burned the heifer became unclean until evening. Everyone involved in creating the purification water became contaminated by the process. But here's the amazing part. The ashes from this one red heifer could purify thousands of people. Verse 9 describes what happened next. Then a man who is clean shall gather up the ashes of the heifer and store them outside the camp in a clean place, and they shall be kept for the congregation of the children of Israel for the water of purification. It is for purifying from sin. When someone needed cleansing from touching a dead body, they would mix some of these ashes with fresh running water. On the 3rd day after contact with death, someone would sprinkle this water on the unclean person using a hyssop branch. They would repeat the process on the 7th day. After that, the person would wash their clothes, bathe, and be clean by evening. This law was permanent. Verse 21 makes it clear, It shall be a perpetual statute for them. Anyone who touched a dead body and didn't get purified would be cut off from Israel. Anyone who entered a tent where someone had died needed purification. Even objects in the tent became unclean. The red heifer ceremony was so rare that throughout all of Israel's history, only 9 red heifers were ever used. The ashes from one ceremony could last for generations, making this one of the most mysterious and precious rituals in all of Scripture. 38. Long years had passed since the rebellion at Kadesh Barnea. An entire generation had died in the wilderness, just as God had promised. Now, in the 1st month of the 40th year, the people were back at Kadesh. Chapter 20, verse 1, records a moment that changed everything. Then the children of Israel, the whole congregation, came into the wilderness of Zin in the 1st month, and the people stayed in Kadesh. And Miriam died there and was buried there. Miriam's death was more than just the loss of Moses' sister. She had been the prophetess who led the women in celebration after crossing the Red Sea. She had protected baby Moses when Pharaoh's daughter found him in the river. She had been a leader in Israel for over 80 years. But something strange happened immediately after Miriam died. Verse 2 tells us, Now there was no water for the congregation, so they gathered together against Moses and Aaron. The timing wasn't a coincidence. Many believe that the rock that had followed them through the wilderness, providing water wherever they camped, had been connected to Miriam's intercession. The people were desperate and angry. They confronted Moses and Aaron with bitter words. In verse 4, Why have you brought up the assembly of the Lord into this wilderness, that we and our animals should die here? They complained that this wasn't a place for grain, figs, vines, or pomegranates. Most importantly, there was no water to drink. Moses and Aaron went to the door of the tabernacle and fell on their faces. The glory of the Lord appeared to them, and God spoke to Moses with specific instructions in verse 8. Take the rod, you and your brother Aaron, gather the congregation together. Speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will yield its water. Thus you shall bring water for them out of the rock, and give drink to the congregation and their animals." Moses took the rod from before the Lord as he was commanded. He and Aaron gathered the assembly before the rock. But then Moses did something that would cost him everything. Verse 10 records his words, "Hear now, you rebels. Must we bring water for you out of this rock?" Notice what happened. God had said, "Speak to the rock," but Moses was speaking to the people instead. He was angry, frustrated after 40 years of leading complainers. And then, instead of speaking to the rock as God commanded, verse 11 tells us, "Then Moses lifted his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation and their animals drank." The water came anyway. God's mercy provided for the people even when his servant disobeyed. But there would be consequences. Verse 12 records God's judgment. "Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe me, to hallow me in the eyes of the children of Israel. Therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them." Moses had represented God incorrectly before the people. Instead of showing God's power through simple obedience, he had acted in anger and taken credit for the miracle. This single moment of frustration would keep him from entering the promised land. Later in the chapter, Aaron faced his own ending. God told Moses to take Aaron and his son Eleazar up Mount Hor. There in verse 26, Moses was to strip Aaron of his garments and put them on Eleazar his son. "For Aaron shall be gathered to his people and die there." Moses did as the Lord commanded. When the 3 men went up the mountain, only 2 came down. Verse 29 records, "Now, when all the congregation saw that Aaron was dead, they mourned for Aaron 30 days, even all the house of Israel." Aaron had served as high priest for 40 years. He had interceded for the people, made atonement for their sins, and stood between the living and the dead to stop plagues. Now his son Eleazar would carry on the priestly duties. For the first time in nearly 40 years, Israel tasted victory. Chapter 21 opens with the king of Arad attacking Israel as they traveled by the way of Atharim. This Canaanite king actually captured some Israelites, but this time, instead of panicking, Israel made a vow to the Lord. Verse 2 records their promise. "So Israel made a vow to the Lord and said, 'If you will indeed deliver this people into my hand, then I will utterly destroy their cities.'" This was faith in action. Instead of complaining, they were asking God to fight for them. God heard their vow and delivered the Canaanites into their hands. Verse 3 tells us, "And the Lord listened to the voice of Israel and delivered up the Canaanites, and they utterly destroyed them and their cities. So the name of that place was called Hormah." But old habits die hard. As they traveled around the land of Edom to avoid conflict, the people grew impatient with the journey. Verse 5 records their familiar complaint, "And the people spoke against God and against Moses. 'Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there is no food and no water, and our soul loathes this worthless bread.'" They were calling God's manna worthless bread. After 40 years of supernatural provision, they still weren't satisfied. This time, God's response was swift and terrifying. Verse 6 tells us, "So the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and many of the people of Israel died." These weren't ordinary snakes. The Hebrew word seraph means burning, suggesting these serpents had a fiery, burning bite that brought agonizing death. The people quickly realized their sin and came to Moses with an urgent plea in verse 7. "We have sinned, for we have spoken against the Lord and against you. Pray to the Lord that he take away the serpents from us." Moses prayed for the people, but God's answer was unexpected. Instead of removing the serpents, the Lord told Moses in verse 8, Make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole. And it shall be that everyone who is bitten, when he looks at it, shall live." Moses made a serpent of bronze and put it on a pole. Verse 9 explains how it worked. "So it was, if a serpent had bitten anyone, when he looked at the bronze serpent, he lived." This wasn't magic, it was a test of faith. Those who trusted God's word and looked at the bronze serpent lived. Those who didn't died. The solution seemed too simple. Just look and live. But that was exactly the point. Healing came through faith in God's provision, not through human effort or understanding. After this, Israel continued their journey and won more victories. They defeated Sihon, king of the Amorites, who had refused them passage through his land. Verse 24 records, "Then Israel defeated him with the edge of the sword, and took possession of his land from the Arnon to the Jabbok, as far as the people of Ammon, for the border of the people of Ammon was fortified." They also conquered Og, king of Bashan, described in verse 33 as a giant. Verse 35 tells us the complete victory. "So they defeated him, his sons, and all his people, until there was no survivor left him, and they took possession of his land." The new generation was learning to fight and win. The long years of wandering were coming to an end. As Israel camped in the plains of Moab, by the Jordan River across from Jericho, their presence struck fear into the surrounding nations. King Balak of Moab had watched Israel's recent victories against Sihon and Og with growing terror. Chapter 22, verse 3 describes his panic. "And Moab was exceedingly afraid of the people because they were many, and Moab was sick with dread because of the children of Israel." Balak knew he couldn't defeat Israel in battle, so he tried a different approach. He decided to hire a prophet to curse them, but not just any prophet. He wanted Balaam, the most famous seer in the region. Verse 6 records Balak's message, "Come now, curse this people for me, for they are too mighty for me. Perhaps I shall be able to defeat them and drive them out of the land. For I know that he whom you bless is blessed, and he whom you curse is accursed." Balaam lived in Pethor, near the Euphrates River, hundreds of miles away. But Balak was desperate enough to send messengers with divination fees all that distance. When the messengers arrived, they delivered Balak's request to Balaam that night. God came to Balaam and asked a simple question in verse 9. "Who are these men with you?" God wasn't asking for information. He was testing Balaam's heart. Balaam explained the situation, and God's answer was clear in verse 12. "You shall not go with them. You shall not curse the people, for they are blessed." The next morning, Balaam sent Balak's messengers away with disappointing news. "Go back to your land, for the Lord has refused to give me permission to go with you." But Balak wasn't giving up. He sent more messengers, this time higher-ranking officials with even greater promises. Verse 17 records Balak's desperate offer, "For I will certainly honor you greatly, and I will do whatever you say to me. Therefore, please come, curse this people for me." Balaam's response sounded spiritual in verse 18. "Though Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I cannot go beyond the word of the Lord my God to do less or more." But notice something troubling. He told them to stay the night while he inquired of the Lord again. Why was Balaam asking God again when God had already given a clear answer? The truth is, Balaam wanted the money and honor Balak was offering. God came to Balaam that night and said in verse 20, "If the men come to call you, rise and go with them. But only the word which I speak to you, that you shall do." This was permission with a warning. The next morning Balaam saddled his donkey and went with the Moabite princes. But verse 22 tells us, "Then God's anger was aroused because he went, and the angel of the Lord took his stand in the way as an adversary against him." Here's the problem. God had given Balaam permission to go, but only if the men came to call him. Instead, Balaam eagerly went with them. His heart was wrong, and God knew it. As Balaam rode his donkey along the path, something extraordinary happened. The donkey saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way with a drawn sword, but Balaam couldn't see anything. The donkey turned aside into the field. Balaam struck the donkey to get her back on the path. Then the angel stood in a narrow path, between two vineyard walls. Again, the donkey saw the angel and pressed against the wall, crushing Balaam's foot. Balaam struck her again. The angel moved to an even narrower place where there was no room to turn. This time the donkey lay down under Balaam. In anger, Balaam struck the donkey with his staff. Then something happened that changed everything. Verse 28 records, "Then the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey, and she said to Balaam, 'What have I done to you, that you have struck me these 3 times?'" Incredibly, Balaam answered the donkey as if talking animals were perfectly normal. He said in verse 29, "Because you have abused me, I wish there were a sword in my hand, for now I would kill you." The donkey responded with perfect logic in verse 30, "Am I not your donkey on which you have ridden ever since I became yours to this day? Was I ever disposed to do this to you?" Then God opened Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way with his sword drawn. Balaam immediately fell flat on his face. The angel asked in verse 32, "Why have you struck your donkey these 3 times? Behold, I have come out to stand against you, because your way is perverse before me." The angel explained that the donkey had actually saved Balaam's life by turning aside. If she hadn't seen the angel and avoided him, Balaam would have been killed. Balaam confessed his sin and offered to return home. But the angel told him to continue with the men, speaking only the words God would give him. When Balaam finally reached King Balak, the Moabite ruler, wasted no time. He took Balaam to the high places of Baal, where they could see a portion of Israel's camp spread out below. Chapter 23 verse 2 tells us they built 7 altars and offered a bull and ram on each one. Balaam told Balak to stand by his burnt offering while he went aside to meet with the Lord. God put a word in Balaam's mouth, and when he returned, Balaam delivered his first oracle. But instead of a curse, blessing came out of his mouth. Verse 7 to 10 records his prophecy. "From Aram Balak has brought me the king of Moab from the eastern mountains. Come, curse Jacob for me, and come, denounce Israel. How shall I curse whom God has not cursed? And how shall I denounce whom the Lord has not denounced? For from the top of the rocks I see him, and from the hills I behold him. There a people dwelling alone, not reckoning itself among the nations. Who can count the dust of Jacob, or number 1/4 of Israel? Let me die the death of the righteous, and let my end be like his." Balak was furious. In verse 11 he demanded, "What have you done to me? I took you to curse my enemies, and look, you have blessed them bountifully." Balaam could only answer, "Must I not take heed to speak what the Lord has put in my mouth?" Determined to try again, Balak took Balaam to the field of Zophim on top of Mount Pisgah. They built 7 more altars and offered the same sacrifices. Again, Balaam went to meet with God, and again he returned with a blessing instead of a curse. His second oracle, recorded in verses 18-24, was even more powerful. "Rise up, Balak, and hear. Listen to me, son of Zippor. God is not a man that he should lie, nor a son of man that he should repent. Has he said, and will he not do? Or has he spoken, and will he not make it good? Behold, I have received a command to bless. He has blessed, and I cannot reverse it." Balaam declared that God saw no iniquity in Jacob and no wickedness in Israel. He described Israel as having the strength of a wild ox and predicted their victory over their enemies. Balak was getting desperate. He said to Balaam in verse 25, "Neither curse them at all nor bless them at all." But he decided to try one more location. This time, he took Balaam to the top of Mount Peor that overlooks the wasteland. For the 3rd time, they built 7 altars and offered the same sacrifices. But this time, something different happened. Chapter 24, verse 1 tells us, "Now when Balaam saw that it pleased the Lord to bless Israel, he did not go, as at other times, to seek to use sorcery, but he set his face toward the wilderness. The Spirit of God came upon Balaam, and he delivered his most magnificent oracle yet." Verses 5-9 contain some of the most beautiful poetry in Scripture. "How lovely are your tents, O Jacob, your dwellings, O Israel, like valleys that stretch out, like gardens by the riverside, like aloes planted by the Lord, like cedars beside the waters. He shall pour water from his buckets, and his seed shall be in many waters. His king shall be higher than Agag, and his kingdom shall be exalted. God brings him out of Egypt. He has strength like a wild ox. He shall consume the nations, his enemies. He shall break their bones and pierce them with his arrows. He bows down, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion, who shall rouse him? Blessed is he who blesses you, and cursed is he who curses you." This was too much for Balak. His anger burned against Balaam, and he struck his hands together in frustration. Verse 10 records his angry dismissal. "I called you to curse my enemies, and look, you have bountifully blessed them these 3 times." Balaam reminded Balak that he had warned him he could only speak what God told him to speak, but before leaving, Balaam delivered one final oracle, this one about the distant future. Chapter 24, verses 17-19 contain one of the most famous messianic prophecies in the Old Testament. "I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob. A scepter shall rise out of Israel, and batter the brow of Moab, and destroy all the sons of tumult. And Edom shall be a possession. Seir also, his enemies, shall be a possession, while Israel does valiantly. Out of Jacob one shall have dominion, and destroy the remains of the city." 4 times Balak had tried to get Balaam to curse Israel. 4 times God had turned the intended curses into magnificent blessings. The prophet who had been hired to destroy Israel had instead prophesied their glorious future. Unable to curse Israel through Balaam's prophecies, the enemy tried a different strategy. If they couldn't destroy Israel through supernatural means, they would corrupt them through moral seduction. Chapter 25, verse 1 records the beginning of disaster. "Now Israel remained in Acacia Grove, and the people began to commit harlotry with the women of Moab." This wasn't just physical immorality, it was spiritual adultery. Verse 2 explains how the seduction worked. "They invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods." The Moabite women lured Israelite men to their religious festivals, where worship involved sexual rituals. Soon Israel was participating in the worship of Baal of Peor, a Moabite god whose worship included prostitution and obscene rites. The Lord's anger was kindled against Israel, and he spoke to Moses with a shocking command in verse 4. "Take all the leaders of the people and hang the offenders before the Lord out in the sun, that the fierce anger of the Lord may turn away from Israel." Moses told Israel's judges, "Every one of you kill his men who were joined to Baal of Peor." Public execution was the only way to stop the spiritual and physical plague that was spreading through the camp. But even as Moses was giving these instructions, something outrageous happened. Verse 6 describes the scene. "And indeed, one of the children of Israel came and presented to his brethren a Midianite woman in the sight of Moses, and in the sight of all the congregation of the children of Israel, who were weeping at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. This man wasn't hiding his sin, he was flaunting it. While the people were mourning and repenting, he boldly brought his Midianite lover right past Moses and into his tent. The man was Zimri, a leader from the tribe of Simeon. The woman was Cosbi, daughter of a Midianite chief. One man couldn't tolerate this open rebellion. Phinehas, son of Eleazar and grandson of Aaron, saw what was happening and took action. Verse 7 tells us, "Now, when Phinehas the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, saw it, he rose from among the congregation and took a javelin in his hand. Phinehas followed the couple into the tent and drove his spear through both of them with one thrust." Verse 8 records the result. "So the plague was stopped among the children of Israel, but the damage was severe." Verse 9 tells us, "And those who died in the plague were 24,000. This was one of the deadliest judgments. In Israel's wilderness experience, God was so pleased with Phinehas's action that he made a special covenant with him. Verses 12-13 record God's promise. "Therefore say, Behold, I give to him my covenant of peace, and it shall be to him and his descendants after him a covenant of an everlasting priesthood, because he was zealous for his God, and made atonement for the children of Israel." The Lord then revealed the source of this temptation. He told Moses in verse 17, "Harass the Midianites and attack them, for they harassed you with their schemes, by which they seduced you in the matter of Peor and in the matter of Cosbi." Later, we learn that this whole seduction scheme was Balaam's idea. Since he couldn't curse Israel, he had advised the Midianites and Moabites to corrupt them through sexual temptation and idol worship. It was a diabolical plan that nearly worked. After the plague at Baal Peor, God commanded Moses and Eleazar to take another census. It had been 38 years since the first counting at Mount Sinai. Chapter 26, verse 2 records the Lord's instruction, "Take a census of all the congregation of the children of Israel from 20 years old and above, by their fathers' houses, all who are able to go to war in Israel." This wasn't just about numbers, it was about transformation. The generation that had rebelled at Kadesh Barnea was gone. These were their children, born in the wilderness, trained by hardship, and ready for conquest. The counting began with Reuben, Jacob's firstborn. His tribe now numbered 43,130 men, down from 46,500 in the first census. Simeon's tribe had suffered the most dramatic decrease, dropping from 59,300 to 22,200, a loss of over 37,000 men, likely due to their heavy involvement in the Baal Peor incident. Gad increased slightly from 45,650 to 4,500. Judah grew from 74,600 to 76,500. Issachar jumped from 54,400 to 64,300. Zebulun rose from 57,400 to 6,500. The descendants of Joseph were counted in two tribes. Ephraim decreased from 4,500 to 30,500, while Manasseh increased dramatically from 32,200 to 52,700. Benjamin grew from 35,400 to 45,600. Dan had the largest tribe with 64,400 men, up from 62,700. Asher increased from 41,500 to 53,400. Naphtali decreased slightly from 53,400 to 45,400. When all the counting finished, the total was recorded in verse 51. "These are those who were numbered of the children of Israel, 601,730. The new total was 601,730 fighting men, only 1,120 fewer than the original 603,550. This was remarkable. Despite 40 years of death in the wilderness, despite plagues that killed tens of thousands, despite the complete elimination of the rebellious generation, Israel's military strength was virtually unchanged. God had kept his promise to maintain their numbers, but there was something even more significant. Verse 64 tells us, "But among these there was not a man of those who were numbered by Moses and Aaron the priest when they numbered the children of Israel in the wilderness of Sinai." Only 3 men from the original census were still alive: Moses, Joshua, and Caleb. Verse 65 explains why. "For the Lord had said of them, they shall surely die in the wilderness." So there was not left a man of them, except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, the son of Nun. The new generation represented hope. They hadn't been infected by the slave mentality of Egypt. They had grown up knowing God's power and provision. They were ready to trust Him for victory in the promised. Then God also gave instructions about dividing the land. The inheritance would be distributed by lot, but larger tribes would receive larger portions, and smaller tribes would receive smaller portions. This ensured both divine guidance and practical fairness. In the middle of discussions about land inheritance, 5 brave women stepped forward with a problem. Chapter 27, verse 1 introduces them. Then came the daughters of Zelophehad, the son of Hepher, the son of Gilead, the son of Machir, the son of Manasseh, from the families of Manasseh, the son of Joseph. And these were the names of his daughters: Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. Their father Zelophehad had died in the wilderness without having any sons. Under current law, this meant his family line would receive no inheritance in the promised land. The daughters presented their case to Moses, Eleazar, the leaders, and all the congregation at the door of the tabernacle. Verse 4 records their argument. Why should the name of our father be removed from among his family because he had no son? Give us a possession among our father's brothers. This wasn't just about land. It was about preserving their father's memory and family name. These women were taking a huge risk. They were challenging established law in front of the entire nation. But they believed their cause was just, and they were willing to stand up for their rights. Moses didn't have an immediate answer, so he did what he always did with difficult cases. He brought their case before the Lord. God's response in verse 7 was swift and favorable. The daughters of Zelophehad speak what is right. You shall surely give them a possession of inheritance among their father's brothers, and cause the inheritance of their father to pass to them. God then established a permanent law for such situations. If a man died without sons, his inheritance would pass to his daughters. If he had no daughters, it would go to his brothers. If he had no brothers, it would go to his father's brothers. If his father had no brothers, it would go to the nearest relative in his family. This was revolutionary for the ancient world. Women's rights were being established in Scripture thousands of years before modern societies would recognize them. But Moses had his own future to consider. He was now 120 years old and knew his death was approaching. The Lord told him in verse 12, Go up into this Mount Abarim and see the land which I have given to the children of Israel. God reminded Moses that he would not enter the land because of his disobedience at the waters of Meribah. But Moses wasn't thinking about himself. He was worried about the people. Verse 16 records his concern. Let the Lord, the God of the spirits, of all flesh, set a man over this congregation. Moses wanted a leader who would go out and come in before them, who would lead them out and bring them in, so God's people wouldn't be like sheep without a shepherd. God's answer was immediate. In verse 18, the Lord said, Take Joshua the son of Nun with you, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay your hand on him. Joshua had been Moses' assistant for 40 years. He had been one of the faithful spies. He had the Spirit of God and the respect of the people. The commissioning ceremony was public and formal. Moses was to set Joshua before Eleazar the priest and before all the congregation. He was to lay hands on him and give him some of his authority so all the congregation would obey him. Verse 21 established the working relationship between Joshua and Eleazar. He shall stand before Eleazar the priest, who shall inquire before the Lord for him by the judgment of the Urim. At his word they shall go out, and at his word they shall come in, both he and all the children of Israel with him, all the congregation. Moses did exactly as the Lord commanded. He took Joshua, set him before Eleazar and the congregation, laid hands on him, and commissioned him as God had directed. The leadership transition was complete and public, ensuring no confusion about who would lead Israel into the Promised Land. As Israel prepared to enter the Promised Land, God wanted them to understand how worship would work in their new home. Chapters 28 and 29 contain the most complete worship calendar in all of Scripture. The Lord spoke to Moses with detailed instructions about offerings, saying in chapter 28, verse 2, "Command the children of Israel, and say to them, my offering, my food for my offerings made by fire as a sweet aroma to me, you shall be careful to offer to me at their appointed time." Every single day would begin with worship. Morning and evening, the priests would offer a 1-year-old male lamb without blemish as a burnt offering. With each lamb came a grain offering of fine flour mixed with oil and a drink offering of wine. Verse 6 explains this was a regular burnt offering which was ordained at Mount Sinai for a sweet aroma, an offering made by fire to the Lord. The Sabbath required additional offerings. Beyond the daily sacrifices, verse 9 commanded, "And on the Sabbath day, 2 lambs in their first year, without blemish, and 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour as a grain offering, mixed with oil, with its drink offering." The Sabbath was special, so it deserved extra worship. Each month brought new celebrations. At the beginning of every month, they would offer 2 young bulls, 1 ram, and 7 male lambs as burnt offerings, along with their grain and drink offerings. They would also sacrifice 1 kid of the goats as a sin offering. These new moon festivals reminded Israel that their time belonged to God. But the biggest celebrations came during the appointed festivals. Passover lasted 8 days and required massive amounts of sacrifices. For 7 days straight, they would offer 2 young bulls, 1 ram, and 7 male lambs daily, plus 1 goat for a sin offering. The grain and drink offerings that accompanied these sacrifices were enormous. The Feast of Weeks, also called Pentecost, had its own special requirements. 7 weeks after Passover, they would offer 2 young bulls, 1 ram, 7 male lambs, and 1 kid of the goats, along with grain and drink offerings. The 7th month was packed with holy days. The Feast of Trumpets began the month with trumpet, blasts, and special sacrifices. 10 days later came the Day of Atonement, the most solemn day of the year, when the high priest would enter the most holy place to make atonement for the entire nation. But the biggest celebration was the Feast of Tabernacles, lasting 8 days. Chapter 29 describes the staggering number of animals sacrificed during this festival. On the first day alone, they would offer 13 young bulls, 2 rams, 14 male lambs, and 1 kid of the goats. Each day, the number of bulls decreased by 1, so by the 7th day they were offering 7 bulls. The total for all 8 days was 70 bulls, 14 rams, 98 lambs, and 8 goats. The grain and drink offerings that went with all these animals required hundreds of pounds of flour, gallons of oil, and vast quantities of wine. This wasn't just worship. It was a massive community celebration that involved everyone in Israel. These festivals did more than honor God. They created a rhythm of life that would keep Israel focused on their Creator. Every week, every month, every season had its special times of worship. The people would never forget who had brought them out of Egypt and given them the promised land. Words have power, especially when spoken to God. Chapter 30 deals with the serious matter of vows and pledges made to the Lord. Moses spoke to the heads of the tribes about this important topic. Beginning in verse 2, "If a man makes a vow to the Lord, or swears an oath to bind himself by some agreement, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth." When a man made a promise to God, that promise was absolutely binding. There were no takebacks, no changing of minds, no excuses. If someone vowed to give something to the Lord or promised to do something for him, they had to follow through completely. But the situation with women was more complicated because of the family structures of that time. A young woman living in her father's house was under his authority. If she made a vow and her father heard about it but said nothing, the vow stood. But verse 5 explains what happened if her father disapproved. But if her father overrules her, on the day that he hears, then none of her vows nor her agreements by which she has bound herself shall stand. And the Lord will release her, because her father overruled her. The same principles applied to married women. If a wife made a vow and her husband heard about it but remained silent, the vow was binding. However, verse 8 shows the husband's authority, but if her husband overrules her on the day that he hears it, he shall make void her vow, which she took, and what she uttered with her lips, by which she bound herself, and the Lord will release her. There was one important exception. A divorced woman or widow had no male authority over her. So verse 9 states clearly, also, any vow of a widow or a divorced woman by which she has bound herself shall stand against her. The timing was crucial in all these situations. The father or husband had to object on the same day he heard about the vow. If he waited until later to disapprove, it was too late. The vow remained binding. But there was a catch for men who tried to manipulate this system. Verse 15 warns, but if he does make them void after he has heard them, then he shall bear her guilt. If a husband heard about his wife's vow, stayed quiet, and then later tried to cancel it, he would be responsible for breaking the promise to God. These laws protected both the authority structure of families and the sacredness of promises made to God. They also protected women from making commitments their families couldn't afford or that would cause family problems. The underlying message was clear. Promises to God are serious business. Whether made by men or women, rich or poor, young or old, vows create real spiritual obligations that must be honored. The time had come to settle accounts with Midian. These people had seduced Israel into the terrible sin at Baal Peor, causing the death of 24,000 Israelites. Chapter 31 verse 2 records God's command to Moses, "Take vengeance on the Midianites for the children of Israel. Afterward, you shall be gathered to your people." This would be Moses' final military campaign. God wanted the Midianites punished before Moses died, and he wanted Israel to learn important lessons about holy war before entering the Promised Land. Moses chose 1,000 men from each tribe, 12,000 warriors total. But the spiritual leadership was just as important as the military force. Verse 6 tells us, "Then Moses sent them to the war, 1,000 from each tribe. He sent them to the war with Phinehas, the son of Eleazar the priest, with the holy articles and the signal trumpets in his hand. Phinehas, the priest who had stopped the plague at Baal Peor by killing Zimri and Cosbi, would lead the spiritual side of this battle. He carried the holy articles and the silver trumpets that would coordinate the attack. The battle was a complete victory. Verse 7-8 describes the result. "And they warred against the Midianites, just as the Lord commanded Moses, and they killed all the males. They killed the kings of Midian with the rest of those who were killed, Evi, Rechem, Zur, Hur, and Reba, the 5 kings of Midian. Balaam, the son of Beor, they also killed with the sword." Notice that Balaam was among the dead. The prophet who had been forced to bless Israel had apparently joined the Midianites in their war against God's people. His greed and compromise finally caught up with him. The Israelites captured all the Midianite women and children, took their livestock and goods, and burned all their cities and camps. They brought everything back to Moses, Eleazar, and the congregation at their camp in the plains of Moab. But Moses wasn't pleased with how the battle had been conducted. When he saw that the soldiers had kept all the women alive, he became angry. Verse 15 records his sharp words, "Have you kept all the women alive?" Moses reminded them that these women had caused the plague at Baal Peor by following Balaam's advice to seduce Israel into sin. He commanded them in verse 17, "Now therefore kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman who has known a man intimately." Only the young girls who had never been married were allowed to live. This seems harsh to modern readers, but God was protecting Israel from future corruption and establishing the principle that sin has consequences. The soldiers then had to undergo purification rituals. Anyone who had killed someone or touched a dead body was unclean for 7 days. They had to purify themselves and their captives on the 3rd and 7th days. All their clothing, leather goods, items made of goat's hair, and wooden objects had to be purified. Eleazar taught them how to purify metals by passing them through fire, while other materials were cleansed with the water of purification made from the red heifer ashes. When it came time to divide the spoils, God established specific proportions. Half went to the soldiers who had fought, and half went to the rest of the congregation. From the soldiers' half, 1 out of every 500 people and animals was given to Eleazar for the Lord. From the congregation's half, 1 out of every 50 was given to the Levites. The amount of plunder was staggering. The livestock alone included 675,000 sheep, 72,000 cattle, 61,000 donkeys, and 32,000 young women. The gold ornaments offered by the officers weighed over 420 pounds. Verse 49 records something remarkable about this battle. And they said to Moses, "Your servants have taken account of the men of war who are under our command, and not a man of us is missing." In a major military campaign involving 12,000 soldiers, not a single Israelite had died. This was clearly God's victory, not just a human achievement. As Israel prepared to cross the Jordan River, 2.5 tribes made an unexpected request. The tribes of Reuben and Gad had massive herds of livestock, and the land east of the Jordan looked perfect for grazing. Chapter 32, verse 1 sets the scene. Now the children of Reuben and the children of Gad had a very great multitude of livestock, and when they saw the land of Jazer and the land of Gilead, that indeed the region was a place for livestock, these tribes came to Moses, Eleazar, and the leaders with their proposal in verse 5. "If we have found favor in your sight, let this land be given to your servants as a possession. Do not take us over the Jordan." Moses' reaction was immediate and angry. He saw their request as cowardice and betrayal. In verses 6 to 7, he demanded, "Shall your brethren go to war while you sit here? Now why will you discourage the heart of the children of Israel from going over into the land which the Lord has given them?" Moses reminded them of what had happened when the spies brought back their fearful report from the promised land. That generation's lack of faith had cost them 40 years in the wilderness. Now Moses feared these tribes were doing the same thing, discouraging the people from trusting God for victory. Verses 13 to 15 show Moses' frustration. "So the Lord's anger was aroused against Israel, and he made them wander in the wilderness 40 years, until all the generation that had done evil in the sight of the Lord was gone. And look, you have risen in your father's place, a brood of sinful men, to increase still more the fierce anger of the Lord against Israel. For if you turn away from following him, he will once again leave them in the wilderness, and you will destroy all these people." But Reuben and Gad quickly clarified their intentions. They weren't trying to avoid the fighting. They wanted to build sheepfolds for their livestock and cities for their families, and then join the battle. Verse 17 records their promise, "But we ourselves will be armed, ready to go before the children of Israel until we have brought them to their place. And our little ones will dwell in the fortified cities because of the inhabitants of the land." They assured Moses they wouldn't return to their homes until every Israelite had received their inheritance west of the Jordan. They were willing to fight, but they wanted their families and livestock settled safely first. Half the tribe of Manasseh also joined this request, bringing the total to 2.5 tribes wanting to settle east of the Jordan. Moses agreed to their proposal, but with strict conditions. Verse 20-22 records his terms. If you do this thing, if you arm yourselves before the Lord for the war, and all your armed men cross over the Jordan before the Lord, until he has driven out his enemies from before him, and the land is subdued before the Lord, then afterward you may return and be blameless before the Lord and before Israel, and this land shall be your possession before the Lord. But Moses also warned them of the consequences if they broke their promise. Verse 23 contains his famous warning, "But if you do not do so, then take note, you have sinned against the Lord. And be sure your sin will find you out." The eastern tribes accepted these conditions completely. They built cities for their families and folds for their sheep, then prepared for war. The men would cross the Jordan armed and ready to fight until all the land was conquered. Moses gave final instructions to Eleazar, Joshua, and the tribal leaders about this arrangement. If the eastern tribes kept their promise and fought, they would receive the land of Gilead as their possession. If they failed to cross over armed for battle, they would have to take their inheritance west of the Jordan with everyone else. The agreement was settled. Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh would inherit the lands of Sihon, king of the Amorites, and Og, king of Bashan, the territories Israel had already conquered. But first, they would help their brothers conquer the Promised Land before Israel entered. The Promised Land, Moses did something remarkable. He sat down and wrote out a complete travel journal of their 40-year wilderness journey. Chapter 33, verse 1, introduces this amazing record. These are the journeys of the children of Israel, who went out of the land of Egypt by their armies under the hand of Moses and Aaron. Verse 2 explains how Moses kept track. Now Moses wrote down the starting points of their journeys at the command of the Lord. And these are their journeys according to their starting points. Moses had been keeping a detailed log all along, recording every place they camped during 4 decades in the desert. The journey began at Ramesses in Egypt on the 15th day of the first month, the day after Passover. The Israelites went out boldly while the Egyptians were burying their firstborn sons whom the Lord had killed. From Ramesses, they traveled to Succoth, then to Etham on the edge of the wilderness. Moses recorded every single stop. Pi Hahiroth, where they crossed the Red Sea. Mara, where the bitter water was made sweet. Elim, with its 12 wells and 70 palm trees. The wilderness of Sin. Dophka, Alush. Rephidim, where they fought Amalek and Moses held up his hands for victory. Then came Mount Sinai, where they stayed for almost a year, receiving God's law and building the tabernacle. Moses listed the camps in the wilderness of Paran, Kibroth Hatava, where they buried the people who craved meat, Hazeroth, where Miriam became leprous, Rithma, Rimmon, Perez, Libnah, Rissa, and many others. Some places had special significance. Kadesh Barnea appeared twice in the list. Once when they first arrived and sent out the spies, and again decades later when they returned during their final year of wandering. Between these 2 visits to Kadesh, Moses recorded 19 different camping places, showing how thoroughly they had wandered in the wilderness. The list includes places where important events happened. Mount Hor was where Aaron died and was buried. The people mourned for him 30 days before moving on to their next camp at Zalmona. Verse 38 gives us the exact date of Aaron's death. Then Aaron the priest went up to Mount Hor at the command of the Lord, and died there in the 40th year after the children of Israel had come out of the land of Egypt on the 1st day of the 5th month. The final entries in Moses' journal show Israel's approach to the Promised Land. They camped in the plains of Moab by the Jordan River across from Jericho, the staging area for their conquest of Canaan. Each of these 42 stops represented a chapter in Israel's education. Some places taught them about God's provision, like Elim with its abundant water and shade. Others taught hard lessons about the consequences of disobedience, like Kibroth Hatava, the graves of craving. Moses' detailed record served multiple purposes. It showed God's faithful guidance through every step of their journey. It provided a historical record for future generations. And it demonstrated that nothing in their wilderness experience had been wasted. Every stop had been part of God's plan to prepare them for the promised land. The journal also proved that God keeps his promises. He had said it would take 40 years for the rebellious generation to die in the wilderness, and the travel log showed exactly how that promise was fulfilled. Every movement, every camping place, every year of wandering had been under God's direction. Now it was time to define exactly what land God was giving to Israel. Chapter 34 begins with the Lord speaking to Moses about the precise boundaries of their inheritance. Verse 2 introduces the topic, "Command the children of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land of Canaan, this is the land that shall fall to you as an inheritance, the land of Canaan according to its boundaries." God didn't leave the borders vague or undefined. He described them with geographical precision that could be verified and mapped. The southern border would run from the wilderness of Zin along the border of Edom, starting from the southern end of the Salt Sea on the east. From there it would go south of the ascent of Akrabim, continue to Zin, and end at Kadesh Barnea. Then it would go to Hazar Adar and continue to Asmon, where it would turn toward the Brook of Egypt and end at the Mediterranean Sea. The western boundary was simple. The Mediterranean Sea itself would serve as the western border. Verse 6 states, "As for the western border, you shall have the great sea for a border. This shall be your western border." The northern boundary was more complex. Starting from the great sea, it would go to Mount Hor, then to the entrance of Hamath, continuing to Zedad, Ziphron, and ending at Hazar Enan. The eastern border would run from Hazar Enan south to Shechem, then to Riblah on the east side of Ain. From there, it would continue south along the eastern shore of the Sea of Chinnereth, the Sea of Galilee, follow the Jordan River, and end at the Salt Sea, the Dead Sea. Verse 12 summarizes the eastern boundary. "The border shall go down along the Jordan, and it shall end at the Salt Sea. This shall be your land with its surrounding boundaries." These weren't arbitrary lines on a map. They were God's gift to his people, carefully defined and guaranteed by divine promise. The land included mountains and valleys, deserts and fertile plains, rivers and seas. It was everything they would need to build a nation. But God also appointed specific leaders to oversee the fair distribution of this land. Besides Joshua and Eleazar the priest, he chose one leader from each of the 9.5 tribes that would inherit west of the Jordan. From Judah came Caleb, the faithful spy who had trusted God 40 years earlier. From Simeon came Shemuel. From Benjamin came Elidad. From Dan came Buki. From Manasseh came Haniel, since half the tribe would settle west of the Jordan. Each tribe received its own representative to ensure the land division was fair and proper. Verse 17 explains their role. "These are the names of the men who shall divide the land among you as an inheritance." These weren't military commanders or wealthy aristocrats. They were men chosen by God for their integrity and wisdom. Their job was to make sure every family received their proper portion of the promised land according to God's will. The boundaries God established in chapter 34 would define Israel's homeland for generations to come. From Dan in the north to Beersheba, in the south, from the Mediterranean Sea in the west to the Jordan River in the east, this would be the land where God's promises would be fulfilled. The Levites had been set apart for God's service, which meant they wouldn't receive a large tribal territory like the other tribes, but God didn't forget about their practical needs. Chapter 35 begins with the Lord's instructions for providing the Levites with places to live throughout the promised land. Verse 2 outlines the basic provision. "Command the children of Israel that they give the Levites cities to dwell in from the inheritance of their possession. And you shall also give the Levites common land around the cities. Each tribe would give some of their cities to the Levites, not as permanent ownership, but as places to live and work. The larger tribes would give more cities, and the smaller. Tribes would give fewer, but everyone would contribute. In total, the Levites would receive 48 cities scattered throughout all the tribal territories. Each Levitical city would have common land around it for their livestock and possessions. Verse 4 describes the size. The common land of the cities which you will give the Levites shall extend from the wall of the city outward 1,000 cubits all around. This arrangement served several important purposes. It ensured that every region of Israel had religious leaders nearby to teach God's law and conduct worship. It also provided the Levites with places to live and graze their animals while keeping them distributed throughout the nation, rather than concentrated in one area. But 6 of these Levitical cities would serve a special purpose beyond housing priests and Levites. They would be cities of refuge, providing protection for people who accidentally killed someone. Verse 6 introduces this concept. And among the cities which you will give to the Levites, you shall appoint 6 cities of refuge, to which a manslayer may flee. Ancient Near Eastern law was harsh when it came to murder. If someone killed another person, the victim's family had the right and duty to kill the murderer in revenge. This system of justice was called the avenger of blood. But what happened when someone died accidentally? What if a man was chopping wood and the axe head flew off and killed his neighbor? Should he die for an accident? God's solution balanced justice with mercy. 3 cities of refuge would be established on each side of the Jordan River. Anyone who killed someone accidentally could flee to one of these cities and find protection from the avenger of blood. But the cities of refuge weren't a haven for murderers. Verses 16 to 18 make clear distinctions. But if he strikes him with an iron implement so that he dies, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. And if he strikes him with a stone in the hand by which one could die, and he does die, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death, or if he strikes him with a wooden hand weapon by which one could die, and he does die, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. Intentional murder was still punishable by death. The cities of refuge were only for accidental killers. If someone killed in anger, hatred, or while lying in wait, they were murderers who deserved to die. When someone fled to a city of refuge, they couldn't just hide there indefinitely. Verse 12 explains the process. And they shall be cities of refuge for you from the avenger, that the manslayer may not die until he stands before the congregation in judgment. The case had to be tried before the congregation to determine whether the killing was accidental or intentional. If it was ruled accidental, the person could stay in the city of refuge and be safe. But there was a time limit. They had to remain in the refugee city until the high priest died. Only then could they return home safely. If they left the city of refuge before the high priest's death, the avenger of blood could legally kill them. Verse 27 makes this clear. And the avenger of blood finds him outside the borders of his city of refuge, and the avenger of blood kills the manslayer, he shall not be guilty of blood. These laws protected innocent life while maintaining justice. They also emphasized the value God places on human life. Even accidental death required consequences and separation. Murder couldn't be atoned for with money, only with the murderers. Life, or, in cases of accidents, with exile and separation. Just as the book of Numbers was ending, one more legal issue needed to be resolved. Remember the 5 daughters of Zelophehad, who had successfully argued for the right to inherit their father's land. Their victory had created an unexpected problem that threatened to disrupt God's careful plan for land distribution. Chapter 36. Verse 1 introduces the concerned parties. Now the chief fathers of the families of the children of Gilead, the son of Machir, the son of Manasseh, of the families of the children of Joseph, came near and spoke before Moses and before the leaders. The chief fathers of the children of Israel. These family leaders from the tribe of Manasseh had been thinking about the implications of allowing daughters to inherit land. They presented their concern to Moses in verses 3 to 4. Now if they are married to any of the sons of the other tribes, of the children of Israel, then their inheritance will be taken from the inheritance of our fathers, and it will be added to the inheritance of the tribe into which they marry. So it will be taken from the lot of our inheritance. And when the jubilee of the children of Israel comes, then their inheritance will be added to the inheritance of the tribe into which they marry. So their inheritance will be taken away from the inheritance of the tribe of our fathers. Here was the problem. If Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah married men from other tribes, their land inheritance would transfer to their husbands' tribes. Over time, this could completely change the boundaries God had established for each tribe. Even the Jubilee year, when land was supposed to return to its original owners, wouldn't solve this problem because the women's inheritance would permanently belong to their husbands' tribes. This wasn't just about money or property. It was about preserving God's perfect plan for the land distribution. Each tribe had been assigned specific territories, and those boundaries needed to remain intact for generations to come. Moses recognized the validity of their concern and brought the matter before the Lord. God's answer was swift and clear. Verse 6 records his solution. This is what the Lord commands concerning the daughters of Zelophehad, saying, "Let them marry whom they think best, but they may marry only within the family of their father's tribe." The daughters could still inherit their father's land, and they were free to choose their own husbands. But those husbands had to come from within the tribe of Manasseh. This way, the land would stay within the proper tribal boundaries, while still preserving the family name and inheritance rights the daughters had fought for. God then established this as a permanent law for all future situations. Verse 7 explains the principle. So the inheritance of the children of Israel shall not change hands from tribe to tribe. For every one of the children of Israel shall keep the inheritance of the tribe of his fathers. This law would apply to any woman who inherited land in any tribe. Verse 8 makes it universal. And every daughter who possesses an inheritance in any tribe of the children of Israel shall be the wife of one of the family of her father's tribe, so that the children of Israel each may possess the inheritance of his fathers. The daughters of Zelophehad were perfectly happy with this solution. Verse 10-11 records their compliance. Just as the Lord commanded Moses, so did the daughters of Zelophehad. For Mahlah, Tirzah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Noah, the daughters of Zelophehad, were married to the sons of their father's brothers. All 5 sisters married their cousins within the tribe of Manasseh. Their inheritance remained in the proper tribe. Their family name was preserved, and they set a precedent for how such situations should be handled in the future. This final law demonstrated God's attention to detail in preserving his perfect plan. Every aspect of life in the Promised Land had been carefully considered and provided for. The tribal boundaries weren't just suggestions, they were part of God's design for how his people would live in the land he was giving them. Verse 13 brings the entire book of Numbers to a close. These are the commandments and the judgments which the Lord commanded the children of Israel by the hand of Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan, across from Jericho. After 40 years of wandering, after countless lessons in faith and obedience, after the death of an entire generation and the rise of a new one, Israel was finally ready. They had God's laws, his leaders, his land boundaries, and his promises. The promised land lay just across the Jordan River, waiting for them to step forward in faith and take possession of everything God had prepared for them. If this deep dive into Numbers has opened your eyes to truths you've never seen before, I want to ask you to do 3 things. First, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We're just getting started on this journey through Scripture's hidden treasures. There are so many more biblical stories that will blow your mind when you see what's really happening beneath the surface. Second, share this video with someone who needs to hear these truths. Maybe it's a friend who thinks the Bible is boring, or a family member going through their own wilderness season. Numbers proves that God's Word is alive, relevant, and full of hope for anyone willing to look deeper. Third, let me know in the comments which part of Numbers surprised you the most. Was it the talking donkey, the bronze serpent, the earth-swallowing Korah? Or maybe it was discovering how every rebellion in the wilderness mirrors struggles in your own life. Remember, the same God who led Israel through the wilderness is leading you through yours. His promises haven't changed, His love hasn't diminished, and His plan for your life is just as detailed and purposeful as His plan was for Israel. Thanks for joining me on this incredible journey through Numbers. Until next time, keep digging deeper into God's Word, because the treasures you'll find there will change your life forever.